Hey, good morning, 222. Hope you guys are having a great day in Columbus, Ohio. It's beautiful out here in Phoenix, I might add. Last week we talked about the overview of the Christ acrostic. And to further put some flesh on the skeleton of the Christ acrostic, I've chosen a different way to approach this from a teaching standpoint. I've decided to look at some Old Testament characters that model the traits in a spectacular way of commitment, honor, responsibility, and so forth. And as a general rule, I talk about men only. Not because I'm a chauvinist, but because we're talking to men. And I want to show you examples, great examples in the Bible of men who have great traits. But today I want to talk to you about the book of Ruth. I want to talk to you about Ruth and her husband, eventually Boaz. Okay? And Ruth is as a matter of verse and statement in the Bible, it is unbelievable to me what a woman of commitment that she was, and probably, well, and that she was. So let's begin with commitment. Look at Ruth. And Ruth was written, the book of Ruth was written about 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. That's when it was written, okay? I've been in church many, many years, and I don't think I've ever heard an entire sermon on Ruth and Boaz. Pieces here and there, and people pick and choose, but it's such a rich and incredibly good book. It tells about two people who are just amazing, amazing human beings. So please get out your Bibles and read along with me from Ruth 1, verses 1 through 13. I'll give you a second to get there. That's Ruth verses 1 through 13. Ruth 1:1 through 13. Now it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and 2 sons. Now, where's Moab? Well, imagine if you were that there's the Dead Sea that just kind of runs right here, right in front of me. And over here on this side, the west side, if you will, that's where Bethlehem is, Bethlehem of Judah. And over here on the east side of the Dead Sea is Moab. And so why did they go to Moab? Well, they went to Moab, we're going to find this out later, but they went to Moab probably because there was a famine in Judah. And they really couldn't get enough food to eat. So this fella took his wife and 2 sons, and they went to Moab. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem and Judah. And they entered the land of Moab, and they remained there. Then Elimelech, the father, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with 2 sons. Well, they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. Well, makes sense. And they lived about 10 years more, and then Mahlon and Chilion also died. And the woman was bereft because her husband and her 2 children had died. So she arose with her daughters-in-law that they might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab, over here, that the Lord had visited his people and he had given them food. So there was no longer a famine in the land. In fact, there was probably as much or more food in Bethlehem in Judah as there was over here in Moab. And she had no husband. Her sons had died. And so what'd she want to do? She wanted to go home. She said, so I'm going to go home. So she departed from the place where she was, and her daughters-in-law came with her. And they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. Well, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law at some point, she said, go return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you've dealt with me and the dead. May the Lord grant that you find rest each in the house of her husband. She said, look, girls, you've been great to me, but you need to go home because there's nothing that I have for you anymore. So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and they wept, and they said to her, no, we're not going to go home. We'll surely return with you to your people. But Naomi said again, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb? Can I get pregnant again, she's saying? That they may be your husbands. Because the deal was in Jewish society, when Mahlon and Chilion died, if there was a third brother, it was his responsibility to actually marry these two women and to keep the family name going of Mahlon and Chilion. But she didn't have any more sons. Wasn't going to happen. And she said, I'm too old to have a husband. And if I said I have hope that I would have a husband, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you wait around to marry them by the time they became of marrying age? She said, no, for it's harder for me than it is for you, because the Lord's hand has gone forth against me. She's lost her husband, she's lost her two sons, and she's trying to do the right thing. And she's saying, go home, girls. Go to your mom's house, get husbands, have a family, have a great life. Well, Naomi was going home to Bethlehem, and she told the two girls the best thing to do was leave her. You get the picture? These two young women were without husbands, and they really had no hope that Naomi could produce more sons, and even if they could, it'd be too long before they became men enough to marry them. So Orpah kissed Naomi and said, adios. But Ruth clung to her. And then she says in the Bible, in Ruth 1, 16 and 17, what I think is one of the most stirring passages in the Bible, certainly one of the most intense verses or sets of verses about commitment that there is. And she says this, do not urge me, Ruth speaking to her mother-in-law now says, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. Unbelievably strong words. I think these verses, personally, I think they should be part of every wedding. Or at least they need to be in the heart of everyone getting married. What if we men, what if we really said to our wives, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, even though I don't like your mother. No, honestly, your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. Thus may the Lord do to me. This is a commitment, men. The Lord kill me. And worse, if anything, but death parts you and me. So what's the rest of the story? Well, they returned to Bethlehem, where Boaz is their second closest relative. Now, Boaz is an older guy. He's much older than Ruth. And he's a wealthy guy, and he's got his fields. And so immediately when they return to Bethlehem, because they're going to starve if something doesn't happen, Ruth shows her work ethic and, yes, her responsibility. And she sets out to go to work in the fields. And when they cut stuff down, there were things that they didn't get at all. And so people would go in the fields. In fact, it was Jewish law that they had to leave some stuff that people could come and pick up for the poor. So she went out and she started working hard gathering grain. Well, Boaz hears about her, and he says in Ruth 2, verse 11, he says, all that you've done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth, and you came to people that you didn't previously know. Her reputation had preceded her. She was above reproach. She was a woman of honor, and Boaz recognized that. So in Ruth 2:9, Boaz steps up and he takes on the role of protector and provider. And that's what we ought to be, men, protector and provider of our families. I have commanded, he says, the servants not to touch you. When you're thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. You know, here was a single woman who had no one to protect her, who was out in the midst of the fields with people who didn't particularly have any respect for who she was or what she was. And Boaz was basically saying, I've told my servants, nobody is to mess with you. And then he went on, and he even made it clear. He actually told his servants, he said, cut down some more grain so that Ruth can have some more. And she worked very hard for him. He was protecting Ruth by having her in his field. He told her, he said, don't go to any other field. Stay in my field because I'm going to protect you and I will provide for you. You see, Boaz was a man of honor, above reproach, a man of responsibility, and he was a man of service too. Ruth 2:14 tells us this. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here, that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain. And she ate and was satisfied, and there was some left. He didn't have to serve her. He chose to take care of her. In fact, he went so far as to go out and say to another man who had a greater right in the family order, do you want this farm field that Naomi has? And the guy was all over that. He would say, yeah, oh yeah, I want that field. I want that field. And then Boaz said to him, but with that, you have to take Ruth. And the guy said, I don't want to take Ruth. He said, I got a family and I don't want, that field is not worth Ruth. And so Boaz said, okay, then in that case, I'll step up and I will redeem her from you. And I will provide for her and I will protect her. He is what is known as a kinsman redeemer, a type of Christ, because Christ redeemed you and me. You know, here's an interesting point, though. Did you know this? Ruth was a Gentile, which means she's a non-Jew. She was a Moabite. But she's very special because she is in the family tree, the lineage of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. How'd that happen? Well, Ruth marries Boaz. Well, that's pretty cool, isn't it? And that is the line through which Jesus Christ was born. Those who have sought God, he has always welcomed and rewarded. Now, aside from being such a great example of commitment, what's so special about that story? Well, Ruth and Boaz were the great-grandparents of King David, who is described in the book of Acts as a man after God's own heart. What a lineage. David grew up in a family that understood honor, service, responsibility. David understood to seek God because Ruth and Boaz had done the same. May we all be committed like Ruth was. May we protect and serve our families as Boaz did. Hey, we need to be intentional in life. Honor Jesus this week. See you next Saturday, Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise.